There, you can see the flame on the end of the match. To make sulfur matches, the first thing you're going to need is a match stick. I'd use some kind of wood that was fairly light. You don't want anything too dense. Pine should work alright. This is redwood that actually used to be part of a balcony that was torn off, and I saved some of the chunks of it and have been using them ever since. Basically, just split off a slab, and then split that into your sticks like that. I like to whittle them down so that it looks actually a little bit more like a match, but there's no reason that you couldn't just leave it squared off. I mean, after all, it's going to wind up being burned anyway. Next thing you need is sulfur. This is called Flowers of Sulphur. You can get it at a drugstore. This is a few years old, but it was $4.50. In the Midwest, people use this, and I think the South also. They'll put it in their socks to keep ticks away when they're hiking in the woods and that sort of thing. But basically, it's just pure sulfur. Get a little pan, and this, frankly, is much better to do outdoors. You want to watch your heat on this because apparently it can burn, but it's fairly easy to get the fumes up into your nose, and that'll clear your head right out. So, here's our sulfur, which in its powdered state is yellow. So we'll go ahead and pour that into the pan. And now what we're going to do is melt it. Put it over your heat source and keep a fairly close eye on it. Put it on about a medium heat, and what will happen is this will start to melt. Then once it's melted, we'll go ahead and dip our matchsticks in there and let it dry on the head. You can see that our sulfur is liquefying fairly quickly. It's been about 5 minutes. This is one of those things you want to make sure that you don't walk off and leave. Also make sure you don't put it on too high of a heat. Once the rest of this is all melted in there together, we'll dip these. Our sulfur is molten now, and you're going to want to keep this at a temperature where it's hot enough that it's still a liquid, but that it's cool enough so that it's almost forming a crust across the top. Because as we dip these sticks in here, we're going to do it about 5 times on each end. And if it's too hot, every time that you dip it back in, it'll basically melt the sulfur that you just put on there off. I tip both ends because that way you can basically, once you have a fire started with one end, put that end out and you still have a match on the other end. I also keep a little bar of some kind to rest them on as they cool. So let's go ahead and dip them. Just dip that end in, coat it a little bit, and then let it cool. And like I said, we'll put about 5 coats on here. This is actually the 4th coat on these. You can see the head built up on there. And that's about as much as you need. And they're finished. So right here we have 12 guaranteed fires. This is a burning lens, which is basically nothing more than a magnifying glass. The advantage of this is that unless you break it, it basically will last forever. Also, you have to get this in a fine point in direct sunlight, and on the right materials it'll ignite just about anything. We could actually just train it right here on our bird's nest. It makes it a little bit quicker though with char cloth. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And you need to get your lens direct dot. I don't know if you can see that in there or not, but it's already smoking. And you have a nearly instant fire. So that's your basics of flint and steel fire starting. Technology that goes back about 2,000 years. In each one of these kits, you have several guaranteed fires as long as you make sure that you build your fire right, which is of course putting small kindling on top of your bird's nest with the tinder in it where you get your flame started, and build up larger sizes on top of that until you get into the bigger size logs. Naturally, you don't want to try to start your fire by putting wood that size right on top of your tinder. And make sure that you have all your materials prepared and ready to put together all at the same time. Both of these kits have several fires in them. As I told you, I prefer the one that's made out of the saddle soap container because you can make more of your char cloth or char bark or rotten wood, that sort of thing, if you need more fire starting materials. Also, something else worth mentioning, with your sulfur, when it cools you can just leave it in the pan, and I use the same pan for it. I wouldn't do it in a cooking pan, and it can be reused. All you need to do is put it on your heat source, let it melt again just like it did when we poured it out of the bottle. So hopefully that was a help. Until next time.
Thank you.